Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I have Tova Mirvis with us, and she is the author of several books, but her latest is We Would Never, which is a novel and a murder mystery and such a riveting tale. Her memoir, The Book of Separation, was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and excerpted in the New York Times Modern Love column. She is also the author of 3 prior novels, Visible City, Outside World, and The Ladies' Auxiliary, which was a national bestseller. Her essays have appeared in publications including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe magazine, Real Simple, and Psychology Today, and her fiction has been broadcast on NPR. Welcome, Tova.
Thank you. Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you.
It's so great to have you here. And I believe we were connected through Nicole Grave Lipson, who's been a guest on the program.
Yeah, she's a friend and a fabulous writer. I'm a big fan of her work.
Yeah, I was so delighted to read your book. I haven't been focusing that much on novels on the podcast because I'm writing my own memoir at the moment. So memoir is what's drawing me. But there are certain novels that just grab hold of me and make me compelled to want to have the guest on the program, like Anne Hood's The Stolen Child and this one. And so I read it and I was really riveted. Can you kind of give a little nutshell version of what the book is about?
Sure. So We Would Never is about a family in Florida who, in the midst of their daughter's divorce, might, or I guess might not, have hired a hitman to kill their ex-son-in-law. And on one hand, it is a mystery. There is a murder, but I really think of it as being much more a mystery about family love and loyalty, about anger, about how things spiral out of control, how people let go of their moral compass and do things that once would have seemed unimaginable to them.
Yeah, there's definitely the psychological aspect of everything happening with the family relationships, the woman Haley going through a divorce with Jonah, and the whole thing about child custody. There's just so many elements that people today deal with in all aspects of separation, of divorce. And there's just so much more. So you had written a memoir most recently before that, right?
Yes.
The Book of Separation. What was the process of writing a novel in comparison to writing a memoir?
Right. Well, I had written 3 novels prior. I really think of myself, primarily as a fiction writer. I write essays, but never really thought I would write a memoir. And then I was going through my own divorce and leaving the Orthodox community I was raised in. And I felt like it was a story I needed to tell, not in fiction, not through the disguise and displacement of fiction, but really my own story. I felt like so much of the question of the Book of Separation was, are you allowed to own your own story? Can you tell your story, even when it's painful and complicated? And I felt like memoir was the form to do that in. I wrote an essay. I was in the New York Times about my Orthodox Jewish divorce ceremony. I thought, okay, I'm going to write this one essay. That's all I have kind of the stomach for to put my most private, painful moment in the New York Times. And it was in the private lives section. And after it came out, I was flooded with emails. And I think it was really the most moving experience I'd had as a writer. It was hundreds and hundreds of emails from people who were sharing their own stories of separations of one kind or another, or transformations, letting go of one way to be and becoming something else. And it's what made me decide to write a memoir. I was afraid, it felt terribly vulnerable, started every day in a kind of little mini state of panic, but I felt like this was a story I needed to tell. And then after the memoir came out, I had that same sense of it being so gratifying to hear from people of all religious backgrounds, that sense of leave taking and reforging a way of being in the world. But I was also really ready to return to fiction. I felt like fiction has so much the pleasure of invention, where, of course, I'm in the book, we're all in the books in different ways. I'm there disguised, I'm there displaced in some ways. But I felt like with fiction, it always has some burning question that I need to understand. And with We Would Never, there was a true story that inspired the story, a true murder. And I was deep down the rabbit hole trying to understand about this case and so many like it. How do people do something so crazy? How do you go from being like a seemingly ordinary family, in this case of Florida, of dentists, to deciding to hire a hitman? Just like, I wasn't interested in the forensics or the police investigation, just what is that emotional process like? Who are people? Who are we on the inside? And that in some ways is what I guess I'm always interested in all of my work.
That's interesting. We're always reading or listening to true crime podcasts or things like that. But as a creative person, you heard that story and you were like, "Ooh, I could do something with that. I can craft it into something." And your interest is the psychological, the relationships. And so you worked with that. You're working with many different characters. What is that like, trying to put in the lens of, your main character, which is Haley? You have such a great beginning where you talk about she's kind of like outside of her body and she's seeing this person on TV. And then at the end, you see the last sentence you have is, "It's impossible to believe that the woman on the screen is me."
I'm so interested in not just in true crime coverage, but in the media where everything is televised. We have access to these stories. I mean, I would Google this story obsessively before I ever thought I would write about it. I would Google this murder story. It's amazing what we can turn up. You can find vast reams of information, but you never get the inner life of the people. Like Dateline, the Dateline special on this case is not going to give you their inner beings, their souls, and what they think about at night before they do something so horrible. That was really inspired the opening, where I have a character watching the coverage really of herself. I think characters, that question of who the different characters are, is the heart of We Would Never. And it's the mystery, right? I mean, the mystery is, yes, there's a mystery of who did it, but why and how and who we are, those are the biggest mysteries of all. And I think that's what takes me so long to write a novel. It's always like a 4 or 5 year process. And I think it's because of that, trying to burrow into the characters. I keep files for each character. When I get stuck, which is, many times a day, I go back to those. I switch to that file and I write about the character. I try to go and search. I'm working on a new novel now, and I've spent this morning just being like, okay, I'm going to take this minor character and I'm just going to write about him for a little while. And it unlocks me a little bit if I can separate from the actual document I'm working in and just delve into character, ask questions about who they are, try to like feel them in some way.
So rather than go with like plot, you're doing not an expose, but you're just delving into the character in your writing by you asking questions and then writing the answers without any connection to plot.
It's a back and forth. I mean, this book certainly more than any of my books had like a more active plot. My first novels, I would say, are quieter plots. So here, sometimes I had this gift of a plot from real life. I was like, I have a hitman, I have a murder, I have this shiny plot. It was like a thrill to have it. But I think that for me, plot comes from who the characters are. So if first I really can know, who are they? What do they think about? What do they feel? That enables me to then ask the next question is, what do they do? And so I feel like they're always intertwined. And so I move back and forth. I also do a lot of outlining. My desktop right now, my computer desktop has endless files. My new novel, my working title for it is Potatoes, which my editor laughed at and said absolutely not. But in my mind, it's called Potatoes. And I've written a few short stories based on that same title. And I have like Potatoes 1, Potatoes 2, Potatoes characters 1.2, Tova new character potato outline. Just I make endless files. In some ways, it's like a crazy making process, but it lets me switch between them. So I have the character file and then I outline. I do a lot of outlining because I think one of the things I learned most as a writer from writing We Would Never is the way one scene causes the next. I think it's true of memoir writing too. I mean, even though memoir is true, it has that same element of storytelling and causality. So if a character does this in scene one, how does that set something in motion for scene two? It's not just this and then this, but this, so therefore this, or this despite this. I'd make notes for myself because once I have that sort of direction in my mind, that sense of causality, I feel like that's when I'm really working well. When I see, oh, they're going to have the, and We Would Never. Haley is going to have kept secret her whole marriage, how much her husband doesn't like her parents. She's kept that secret and she's getting divorced and she's furious at her husband, her soon to be ex-husband. So she tells her mother how much he didn't like them during the marriage. And then that makes Sherry, the mother, decide to do the next thing. And so I think of it as these dominoes, creating a domino effect of my plot. So there is that sense of momentum and movement in a book.
There's like almost like an architecture to it. I love that. Okay, so your book is focused on family, a murder mystery. When was the moment that you realized you were going to focus a lot on the inner life of these characters? What you said before, that when you see a true crime story on TV or radio or whatever, they're not showing the inner thoughts.
I think it really came out of my frustration with that. We can watch these stories. Sometimes I get drawn into them, sometimes I resist. But if you ever had that experience of going down the rabbit hole in one of these stories, I think one of the things that keep us coming back to them is we never get the real heart of it. Even if we know who did it, we get the solution. That's not really enough of a solution. It's not satisfying, to know the answer. It's the how and why, all the sort of surrounding pieces of it. And that's what I feel like true crime rarely gives us. And so when I first got interested in this case, I had a very tangential connection to this case. And the man who was murdered in Tallahassee at Florida State University was an acquaintance. He was a friend of my ex-husband's, which is how I sort of knew him. And we were Facebook friends. And I saw that he was murdered. And so when I started being down the rabbit hole, reading about it, I was horrified just on a personal level and also really curious. But I didn't think I was going to write about it. I thought it was my distraction from what I was writing. I was working on my memoir, and then I had started another novel. I was going to write this book about Timothy Leary because he lived in the old house I live in Boston from 1960 to 1961. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And so I made this very early stab at a novel. But, usually I try not to be distracted, but I would spend hours when I was supposed to be writing, reading about this murder case. And I finally realized it had its hold on me, but not because of what I was reading, but because of what was not there. Because I just thought, how do you do it? How do you be, a nice dentist in nice in quotes, dentist in South Florida and decide like, yeah, let's hire a hitman. Yeah, let's do this. Like, how could you do it? And in all these cases, who does it? Like, what separates those of us who might imagine doing it or might fantasize or might be in an angry divorce from crossing that line? And I felt like it was something I had to know. I had to understand it and I had to invent it because it wasn't on Dateline.
I wondered if you have your book with you, if you could read a little bit from it on page 196.
Sure. Okay, so this is a scene between Sherry, who is the mother-in-law in this story, who is dealing with her daughter's divorce. And she's someone who always says, I would do anything for my children. And maybe in some ways, the book is asking the question of, anything. Do you mean anything? And this is a fight where before murder, there are always options. They decide and they are going to try to pay off Jonah, the ex-husband, to allow Haley to move closer to them in South Florida. And Sherry takes it upon herself to go offer this money. And this is a scene where they are fighting it out. And I guess the only other thing you need to know is that Sherry has a son, Adam, who doesn't speak to her, and he's going to be referenced here. Are you surprised? Even your own son doesn't want to have anything to do with you, Jonah said. Don't you dare talk about Adam, she shouted, her hands fluttering in front of her like two small birds. Do you think you can control me? I can say whatever I want. You don't think Haley told me everything? Do you think all those times when we didn't come, it was only because of me? Haley didn't want to either. You can blame me if it makes you feel better, but it doesn't change the fact that she only puts up with you because she has no choice. You're the one who left for no reason. You're the one who broke your family, she screamed. Do you have any idea how much we all hate you? Do you have any idea, Sherry, how little that matters? He said. This is not the end, she mustered. She spun around and started to walk down the driveway. He followed her, as if ensuring that she was really going to leave. She got back in the car but couldn't drive away so long as Jonah was standing there watching her. She felt a surge through her body, a jolt in her mind. All she had to do was put the car into drive instead of reverse. And then what? A shift of her hand, a press of her foot was all it would take. The car would do the rest. Even after Jonah went inside his house and she drove away, she felt the shadow of something dark, almost monstrous, inside her.
So really in a little bit more than half a page, this really escalated. It was a fight. It's mostly dialogue. It's really all dialogue, right? There's little things here, there, but it's really, waving hands, but nothing really is happening. So it's the dialogue. And so the craft of this piece, of this scene, is how you build the dramatic tension where we leave the character in a different emotional place from where she started. And I noticed that you did something. The old trope of writing dialogue would be like, always use the word said, she said, he said. And you use different words, which I've seen more of a trend lately. He mustered, she screamed, it's not just said. Talk to me about some of these choices, because it's always choices when you're writing.
Right. It's always choices, and sometimes it happens over many stages. There's so many layers of editing that go into a book. When I started the book, it was called New Novel One. Every time I made a big change, I updated that file number. And by the time I gave it to my editor, it was called New Novel 58. So many versions, so many changes, and something like that question of how do you tag dialogue? I think that that's probably something I pay attention to late in the game, like New Novel 55 is when I start to really think about, okay, it goes said, and it just looks repetitive on a page. And so I think some of it's that question of how can you succinctly convey emotion? So she screamed, she mustered. I do like to use, because I feel like it's better than saying she said angrily. I feel like I'd rather use the one word for that than use the adverb to describe the dialogue. And sometimes I feel like you can leave off the tag altogether, especially I think when you want that heightening feeling where, so much of the book I feel like is about escalation, how the emotion might start, mid-level and it needs to ratchet up and up and up. And so, I thought a lot of how we fight with people. You start off and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, we're screaming. How did this happen? Or how things get out of control, or how, I thought a lot also about the ways that both in this scene, Jonah and Sherry, and maybe in life and with people, we know how to find people's weaknesses. We know that one sentence that is so devastating where we really aim at someone's raw wound. And I felt like I wanted them, I was shooting bows and arrow at each other. Like she shoots one that lands, and so he has to shoot one back. Could I find the sentence that I knew would land in that raw, vulnerable spot for my characters?
And that comes to really knowing your characters, the way that you do a deep dive into each of your characters. And so if you know them, you kind of know what's going to land with them, what's going to really bother her. Like when Jonah said to her, do you have any idea, Sherry, how little that matters? Her whole life is about mattering to her kids, mattering to her family, mattering in the scheme of the emotions with the family, and mattering to him, which she realizes she didn't. And so I think that really lands.
Right. For her, so much is about she wants control. She wants to be able to have some control over her children who are adults now. She wants to feel like all the energy she put into raising these children means
Yeah.
they'll be close to her. I think her fear is of fading away or being alone or being extraneous. And so Jonah's saying that, ostensibly he's just saying that your feelings in this moment don't matter. But really what he's saying to her is, you don't matter in this. And that is a devastating blow for her.
Yeah, yeah, it's really powerful. And so a lot of these characters make morally ambiguous decisions, but yet reading it, we still feel empathy for them. How did you decide to work that into your novel?
That was one of the really big questions that I faced. And, if I think about novels 1 through 58, a good 20 of those, I would say, go to that question. Because, on one hand, I'm writing about a family that, whether they go through it or not, I won't give you any spoilers, but clearly they are making some very, very questionable choices. And yet I want the reader to empathize. And it was hard. It was that hard question of how do I make them believable? I need you to believe that they're capable of this. If they're just lovely people, and then on page 200, all of a sudden they hire a hitman. You'd be like, I don't believe you at all. So I thought of it as this runway. I needed to create like a gradual on ramp. And earlier drafts, I had Sherry in particular start off a lot angrier and more out of control. And some of the feedback I got early on was she's too much. I don't feel like reading her on page one that way. I mean, so much of writing is revising, being willing to say, oh, I thought this was an almost done draft, and hearing feedback and crying a little bit, and then coming back at it and saying, okay, I could take that apart. I could fix that. And so I moved Sherry. So I sort of thought of her, okay, she's going to start. She's a little worked up. She's worried about her daughter, but I think you could relate to her. The feeling of like, maybe you don't want to be her, but we can relate to a mother-in-law who's watching a daughter go through a very painful divorce. And she's a little riled up. She's at a 5, not at a 10 to start with. And then I was going to build her over the course of it. And I felt like, in terms of likability, I felt like this sense that so much of fiction for me is about finding empathy, is about choosing to view characters empathically. On my desk next to me, I kept this quote from the great writer Vivian Gornick, the memoirist, who says that in order for the drama to deepen, you have to be willing to see the cunning of the victim and the loneliness of the monster. And that phrase, the loneliness of the monster, I feel like those were my marching orders in some ways throughout this book that, yes, they were going to make these choices. And yes, there were times I wanted you to feel like, don't do this, back down. But that sense that everyone has their loneliness, even the monsters among us have wounds and pain. And I think the thing that I most care about in writing fiction is being able to excavate that loneliness and to say, like, put aside your judgment for 1 minute and let's feel them. Let's feel it from their point of view, not from the how could they do that perspective.
So, what would your advice be for writers who are writing emotionally charged material? How do you excavate that?
I always feel like it's almost like a softening inside myself. I feel like don't go in like from, above looking down. I feel like let me be them for a while. I really try to imagine myself. I pick something in my own life and I make it more extreme. For Sherry, she feels like she's given her life to raising these children and now she might end up alone. So I have 3 kids. My youngest is in high school. I have some anxiety about, being an empty nester coming, waiting for me. So am I like a crazy person about it? No, I truly believe I am not. But could I imagine it? Could I imagine what might push me there? Can I almost use myself to imagine my way into things? And certainly in memoir writing, I faced this question a lot. I mean, I was writing a memoir about divorce and about religion, which are hot button subjects. They were charged. And of course, in my divorce, there was anger. There's always that urge to be like, oh, let me settle that score on this page. But I knew that was never my best writing. I always wrote best when I could write from my most expansive or empathic self, when myself who was willing to see another side, maybe my softest self, and I could almost quiet the top voices like the anger or the anxiety or the recrimination, all those pieces. And just, I felt like with writing memoir, I was like, don't write from the anger, write from the sadness. I feel like sadness is a much stronger note to write from. And that was really for the memoir. Maybe I pulled some of that into this book. If you follow this story, if you, Google this story, it's the Dan Markel murder story. If you Google it, the commentary in YouTube is like the nicest thing said about this family is, they should burn in hell. That's like the kind things. It's hateful. And I mean, it's a terrible thing. I'm, not to say, of course, it's a tragedy, but if like for one moment you put that aside and you look at it like a tragedy, the same way in a novel, we look at things like a tragedy. We have our sort of judging sides a little softer and we see it from all points of view. Can I look at this true crime story as a family tragedy? And that enables me to sort of enter their points of view in that more empathic mode.
Let's talk revision because you said you had 58 versions.
Yes.
How do you know that it's done? I mean, if you have so many versions, like what is that? I know when I'm writing an essay, right? I get this moment, I'm like, it's done. And it's like, I'm not going to go back. It's done. But with a longer form, like a novel or a memoir, do you get that?
Right, with an essay, there's always that feeling. I usually, when I am done with an essay, I print it out and I mark it up by pen. And when I have no notes for myself, I feel like, okay, or it's like a tiny thing. I feel like that it's a controllable entity. I feel like I can wrangle this 1,000-word essay or this piece. A
Yes.
novel or memoir, it feels like to wrangle it. I always feel like I'm trying to take care of like a million wild little children at the same time because it's so many parts. And so one thing I know, and that I feel like in some ways, the thing I've learned through trial by fire, through pain, is it takes a long time. I've learned to be patient, even though I'm in the middle of writing a new novel now. Part of me wants to be like, oh, I could do this in a year. And then I laugh. I'm like, you have the illusion you will do it in a year. It will not be a year. It will be several. It just takes that time. I mean, I'm always sort of revising as I go, but I think my favorite moment of the process is when I can print out a full draft. It's a messy draft. It is not by any means close to being done, but it goes from beginning to end. And then I really start the work. I take out this purple pen I love and I like mark it up and I force myself to sit. I'm like, you will not get off this couch until you read this book from start to finish because I want the whole thing in my head. And I just go through phases. And there comes a moment when I show it to people. I don't like to show it to anyone very early on because it's so delicate. The fear that someone could say the wrong thing, they could pop my little bubble I'm trying to make. But I really value so much feedback from other writers and friends. And then I start to get feedback. And I think that part of it is being willing to hear it. I always have the moment. Every time someone gives me feedback, there's a voice inside me that always says, absolutely not. You're wrong. You don't know. Like a defensive voice. Like, and then I like let that pass. And I'm like, oh, what would that look like? How can I do that? And I've learned that you can take apart a book, a memoir, any piece of work, and it doesn't fall apart. I can redo the beginning. I can fix the end, and it holds somewhere around, I guess, new novel 30. I gave my agent what I thought was a done draft. I thought this is, 3 year, 4 years, I'm done with this thing. And I sent it to her, spent a week very nervous waiting. And she wrote back, wow, Tova, this is great. Can we talk? And I was like, of course we can talk. We can talk about where we're going to send it. Let's talk about the cover art. And we talked, and she was like, I really love what you're doing. I think you need to rewrite the whole ending. I was like, what? The only thing you want to hear is it's perfect. Don't change a
Right.
word. You're not going to hear that, and it's not perfect. And so I did it. It took me 6 months. I rewrote the whole ending. She was absolutely correct. I needed to build out the ending. The book had initially stopped a lot earlier, and a lot of those later scenes were recounted as flashbacks. And she said, you're losing your drama. So I built it out, gave it back to her, and I was like, oh, now, it's done. And, she wrote back, she's like, oh, I love what you did with the ending. It's totally working now. We just need to work on the beginning now. And I would like to say I was cheerful. I was not. I like got off the phone and like had a good cry, a few days moping. And then I was like, okay, I can hear this. And then I reworked the whole ending. And that was where I really focused on that question of likability. I moved the starting point. I changed the character arc to create a greater sense of relatability for the characters. And then I gave back to her and she was like, tight in the middle, cut, 50 pages, line edit, and then it was done. But it's that stamina of being willing to go at it over and over again. I feel like it's not the sprint, it's not the short run, it's the marathon of forms. And there's a certain staying with it. And in terms of when it's done, so someone once said to me, you know, it's done when you hate it. And I do not think that's true because I have learned that you can hate it and it might not be done. I know that's not necessarily encouraging, but you could hate it in the moment and then you go back to it. I think there just comes a moment when I feel like I have nothing left for me, nothing left inside me to give this book. Like I am expended, like every piece of me is used up in the creation of it.
So many people think you just sit down, you write it again, you write, but there's just so much that goes into it, the craft of it. Do you feel that there's something that you learn from this process that you're taking into your next novel?
Definitely. I feel like maybe of any book, I think I learned the most from writing We Would Never. And I think it's because it was a different kind of book for me, because it had a lot more about pacing and suspense. And there's a big plot twist. There's a sort of a hairpin turn that happens. And so I learned a lot about pacing and plotting and how you pick up the pace and when you slow down. And I think I also just learned something about my own maybe it reminded me of something I know just about the revision process that, you know, writing a new book now, what I know is that right now I think I'm sketching the book. I'm working in broad strokes and it's okay because I will come back to it again and again, that I'm trying to be better able to tolerate the unfinished state and to know that I don't have to perfect this scene to move on. I know when to go forward, leave something, and come back to it later. And the book I'm writing now, I would not describe as a mystery at all, but in some sense, every work of fiction and memoir, even an essay, is a mystery, right? What is the question? There's always a question. What is pulling my reader through this? In a mystery, it's usually the who did it or something like that. But even in a book that's not sort of technically a mystery, the reader wants to solve something. It might just be, why does the character feel this way? Or what did they do next? But that trying to use those elements of suspense, even emotional suspense, to keep the reader inside and to create that sense of movement through a book.
I love that. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation with you, Tova. We would never. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to read the Book of Separation. I
Well, I
think
really
that'll
appreciate
help
it.
me with writing mine. So thank
Right. Good luck
you.
writing a memoir. I mean, it's a long process, but I feel like memoir has such a gratifying feeling of, you know, you open yourself out to the world. And I think that kind of opening out and vulnerability invites other people to do that as well and to tell their stories.
Oh, that's a beautiful sentiment. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.